When I saw the HOA cabin on my land, I didn't call a lawyer, I didn't call the cops, I set a trap. 30 days later, she cut my fence on camera and lied about it to a judge. That's when everything ended. I've learned something over the years. You don't really understand what kind of person someone is when things are easy. You find out when there's land involved, and paperwork, and someone who thinks the rules bend for them. That morning started like most of my mornings do now. Quiet, predictable, the kind of quiet you only get when you've lived long enough to earn it. I woke up before sunrise, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and stepped out onto the porch while the air was still cool. Pine, damp earth, no traffic, no HOA newsletters taped to my door, just birds, and wind moving through trees that had been there longer than anyone currently alive. I have a routine. Every morning, I walk part of my boundary line, not because I'm paranoid, because my father taught me something when I was young. Land doesn't protect itself. Over the years, I've dealt with small things. Hikers who wandered too far, someone pitching a tent where they shouldn't. Once a couple tried to park an RV near the creek. Those situations usually ended with a conversation and an apology. Most people respect boundaries once they realize they've crossed one. That's why what I saw that morning made my stomach drop. At first, it didn't register as a problem, just a shape. Straight lines where there shouldn't be any. Something rigid cutting through the natural curve of the forest. I stopped walking and looked again, squinting through the branches. It wasn't a tent. It wasn't a shed. It was a cabin. New lumber, clean angles, glass windows catching the early light. The kind of structure that takes planning, money, and confidence. The kind of thing no one builds by accident. I didn't rush toward it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't feel angry. What I felt was something colder, because when someone builds like that, deep inside land they don't own, they're not hoping you won't notice. They're testing you. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the forest wake up around me. Then I pulled out my phone, opened the GPS, parcel lines, survey overlays, coordinates I knew by heart. I checked once, then twice, then I cross-referenced it with my father's original survey. There was no mistake. The cabin sat well inside my boundary, not near it, not brushing it. Inside, that's when it clicked. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't sloppy research. This was someone betting that I'd hesitate, that I'd complain, that I'd argue, that I'd get tired. People like that don't fear confrontation. They fear documentation. I took a few photos, nothing dramatic, wide angles, detail shots, time and location stamped automatically. The kind of images that don't argue, they just exist. Then I turned around and walked back toward the house, coffee still warm in my hand. I didn't call anyone, not yet, because react emotionally and you lose control. I wasn't interested in reacting. I was interested in gathering ammunition. I wanted to see exactly how far they would go when they thought no one was watching. That cabin wasn't the problem. It was the invitation. And before the sun was fully up, I had already decided how I was going to answer it. I didn't go back to the cabin right away. That might sound strange, but rushing in is how you miss details. I've learned that over the years. Whether it's machinery, contracts, or people, haste hides things. So, I finished my coffee, let the morning settle. Then I grabbed my truck keys and drove the long way around, approaching the site from the lower ridge instead of the trail I normally used. I parked the truck well back and walked to the edge of the clearing. I stood there longer than I needed to. Not angry, not confused, clear. This wasn't about a cabin. It was about leverage. HOAs don't move fast unless they think time is on their side. They build first, argue later. They rely on momentum. If something stands long enough, people stop questioning it. If they stop questioning it, it becomes established. And once it's established, they call it tradition. I wasn't going to let it reach that stage. That's when I made my first move. I walked back to the truck and pulled out two things I always keep behind the seat: a steel T-post and a roll of bright red private property, no trespassing signs. The cheap kind, loud, impossible to miss. I didn't put them right next to the cabin. That would have been obvious. Instead, I walked down the faint path I'd noticed earlier, the one leading back toward the HOA subdivision. I followed it until it narrowed, right where anyone coming from their side would have to pass through. That's where I drove the post into the ground, one sign, chest high, facing their direction. Clean, legal, undeniable. I stepped back and looked at it for a moment. Then I took a photo, wide shot, close up. GPS coordinates burned into the image. I wasn't blocking anything yet. I wasn't confronting anyone. I was drawing a line. If they respected the law, that sign would be the end of it. If they didn't, I'd have exactly what I needed. I turned around and walked back to the truck, already knowing the answer. Because people who build like that don't back down when they're warned. They escalate. And now, the next move was theirs. The sign survived the night. I know that because the next morning, before the coffee had finished brewing, my phone chimed. A motion alert. One of the trail cameras along the lower ridge had picked something up. I didn't rush. I poured the coffee first, sat down, took a sip. Then I opened the clip. Headlights cut through the trees. An unfamiliar SUV rolled to a stop right where the path narrowed. Doors opened. Voices carried low and irritated. A flashlight beam swept through the brush, then stopped, right on the sign. Someone laughed, not nervous laughter, annoyed laughter, the kind that says, "Who does this guy think he is?" A woman stepped into frame, blonde bob, neat jacket, clipboard tucked under one arm like it belonged there. She leaned in, read the sign, and shook her head slowly. The smile on her face didn't reach her eyes. She said something I couldn't hear clearly, but the tone was unmistakable, dismissive, certain. She pointed at the sign, then down the path toward the cabin. One of the men gestured like he wanted to just pull it out right then. She stopped him with a raised hand. Not yet. That was my first look at Karen. By mid-morning, she was at my gate. I didn't hear her pull up. I heard the engine stop, then the sound of a car door closing harder than necessary. When I stepped out onto the porch, she was already walking toward me, clipboard in hand, posture straight, smile fixed like she was about to explain something for my own benefit. "Good morning," she said, before I'd said a word. "I'm Karen Westbrook, president of the HOA." She said it slowly, deliberately, like a title I was supposed to respect. Behind her stood three others, two men, one woman, all wearing HOA-branded polos. One of the men looked bored, the other looked uncomfortable. The woman kept her eyes on her phone. Karen glanced past me toward the trees, then back at my face. "We noticed a sign this morning," she said, "along the access trail." I waited. "It's causing some confusion," she continued. "That area has traditionally been used by our community." There it was, not a question, a declaration. I nodded once. "It's my land." Her smile tightened, just a fraction. "Well," she said, tapping her clipboard lightly, "this section has historically been treated as shared space. There's been a cabin there for—" "No," I said, calm, even. "There hasn't." She blinked, not from surprise, from irritation. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't pull out papers, I didn't gesture toward the woods. I let the silence stretch. Karen recovered quickly. "Perhaps you're not familiar with the local arrangements," she said. "Our board approved the structure as a community retreat. It's well within our jurisdiction." That's when I asked my first real question. "When did the board vote on it?" Her eyes flicked to the clipboard, then back to me. "It was discussed internally," she said. "I don't have the minutes on hand, but—" "I'm not asking about discussion," I said. "I'm asking about a vote." The man standing to her left shifted his weight, just slightly. He didn't look at me. He looked down at the gravel, resignation. Karen cleared her throat. "The board authorized me to proceed." "That's not a vote," I said. Her smile tightened again. "Look," she said, lowering her voice. "You just moved back here. There's no need to start things off on the wrong foot. We value cooperation." "So do I," I said. She nodded, mistaking that for agreement. "That sign," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the woods. "It needs to come down. It's misleading." I met her eyes. "The sign stays." Her jaw set. "You don't have the authority to restrict access," she said. "I do," I replied. "On my land." "You're creating a problem where there doesn't need to be one," she snapped. "No," I said. "I'm documenting one." That's when she broke. She turned just enough to shield her face from me and said low and sharp, "Take care of it." The uncomfortable man hesitated. Just a second. Karen noticed. She looked at him like hesitation was betrayal. "Now," she said. I didn't move. I didn't stop them. I didn't say another word. They left. and I stood on the porch long after the sound of the SUV disappeared down the road. I didn't check the cameras right away. I didn't need to, because I'd left the sign standing, and Karen had just ordered her people to remove it, which meant the next time I watched that footage, it wouldn't be a misunderstanding, it would be a crime. They came back that afternoon, not late, not under cover of darkness, broad daylight. That told me everything I needed to know. People who think they're wrong wait for night. People who think they're untouchable don't. The alert hit my phone while I was in the workshop, hands dusty, radio low. I didn't stop what I was doing. I finished tightening the bolt, wiped my hands, then picked up the phone. Same camera, same stretch of trail. The SUV rolled in slow this time, confident. Doors opened. Karen wasn't there. She didn't need to be. She'd already given the order. Two men stepped into frame. One of them I recognized, the one who had hesitated on my porch. He looked around first, checked the trees, checked the ground. The other didn't bother. He went straight for the sign. No discussion, no hesitation. He reached into the back of the SUV and pulled out a pair of bolt cutters. Lined them up on the twisted steel wire holding the sign to the post. One squeeze. The wire snapped clean. The sign slid down and hit the dirt. The man who had hesitated earlier exhaled slowly, like he was hoping that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The other man stepped forward and kicked the fallen sign out of the way. Hard. Then, without a word, he planted his boot against the steel T-post and leaned into it with his full weight. Once. Twice. Metal groaned. On the third shove, the post bent forward, angling off-center like a broken tooth. That was the moment. Not the cut wire, not the fallen sign. The moment someone decided damage wasn't enough. They needed to make a point. The hesitant man turned his face away from the camera, hands on his hips, jaw tight. He didn't stop it. He just didn't want to be seen watching. The other man laughed, short, sharp, dismissive. They dragged the sign into the brush, kicked dirt over the base of the post, and walked back to the SUV like this was routine, like private property was an inconvenience, not a boundary. The engine started. Gravel crunched, and they were gone. I watched the clip once, then again, then frame by frame. Clear faces, clear actions, clear intent, timestamp, GPS overlay, no ambiguity. I didn't feel anger, I felt confirmation, because now the question wasn't who owns the land. It was who knowingly destroyed clearly marked private property after being warned. That evening, I didn't replace the sign. That was deliberate. People think escalation means reacting louder, faster, bigger. It doesn't. Sometimes escalation means freezing the scene exactly as it is. I left the bent post right where it stood, took photographs from every angle, close-ups of the cut wire, wide shots showing the angle of the post, measured the distance to the nearest survey marker, logged the time, logged the footage, backed everything up in 3 places. Then I wrote, not an email, not a text, a letter, clean, formal, boring, the kind of document that doesn't threaten, it records. I addressed it to every HOA board member by name, certified mail, signature required, digital copies sent with red receipts. I laid out the facts. The sign had been legally placed on my property. The individuals involved had been verbally warned. The sign had been cut down. The post had been intentionally damaged. The incident was captured on video. I attached still frames, timestamps, coordinates. Then I added one paragraph at the end. Just one. It stated that all structures, materials, or improvements currently located on my land were unauthorized, that the HOA had 30 days to remove them, and that after that period, anything remaining would be considered abandoned property and handled accordingly. No insults, no emotion, just consequence. Karen responded within hours, not to me, to everyone else. A community-wide email, bold subject line, words like misunderstanding, safety concern, shared access. She claimed the sign had been removed to prevent injury. She accused me of creating hostility. She warned residents not to engage with me directly. She didn't deny the act. She reframed it, and reframing, once the facts are locked, is an admission. I didn't reply. I didn't comment. Instead, the next morning, I replaced the sign. Same spot, same height, same wording. But this time, beneath it, I added a second notice, laminated, clean font. This area is under video surveillance. No threats, no warnings, just reality. I drove the post in deeper than before, took photos, logged the time, logged the coordinates. Then I walked away. If Karen wanted to claim confusion, she'd just lost that option. If she wanted to escalate again, she'd be doing it knowing she was being recorded. Either way, the path forward had narrowed, and if she crossed that line one more time, she wouldn't be testing my patience. She'd be testing a prosecutor. I didn't rush to rebuild anything. That's a mistake people make when they think momentum is about speed. It isn't. Momentum is about direction. And right now, Karen was already moving exactly where I wanted her to go. So I waited one full day. I let the bent post stand. Let the cut wire rust just enough to look real. Let the photos sit quietly in my files. I wanted distance between the first act and the second. Space. Separation. Because patterns matter. On the second morning, I loaded the truck. Real fence this time. Not symbolic. Not cheap. 8-foot steel T-posts. Heavy-gauge field fencing. Proper clips. A post driver with enough weight to make the ground answer when it hit. I wasn't blocking a view. I wasn't hiding anything. I was asserting control. I followed the same path Karen's people had used, the same narrow choke point between the trees. That mattered. You don't fence the whole forest. You fence the access. You make the choice obvious. I drove the first post deep, then the second, then the third. Each strike rang solid, a clean, honest sound, the sound of something being set, not threatened. As I worked, I spoke out loud. Not for drama, for the record. This fence marks private property. Unauthorized entry is trespassing. Clear, calm, documented. By noon, the fence was up. Tight, straight, properly clipped. No gaps big enough to argue about. I added 2 signs this time. One at eye level, one lower, where you couldn't miss it unless you were deliberately not looking. Then I walked the fence line slowly and filmed it end to end. No cuts, no edits. Just a steady walk showing the posts, the wire, the signs, and the surrounding trees. I ended the video by panning to one of my survey markers and holding the frame for a full 10 seconds. No ambiguity. That afternoon, Karen emailed me. Short, sharp, written like a command pretending to be a request. She claimed the fence obstructed established community access. She demanded it be removed immediately. She warned of consequences if I didn't comply. She CC'd the entire board. I read it once, then I forwarded it to my attorney and did nothing else. That night, the cameras lit up again. Not one vehicle this time, 2. They parked farther back, just outside the first camera's range. That alone told me Karen had learned something, but not enough. 4 people came in on foot. Flashlights low, voices hushed. One of them tripped over a root and cursed under his breath. They weren't comfortable anymore. Good. They reached the fence and stopped. You could feel the moment of decision even without sound. The way bodies shift. The way people look around when they know they shouldn't be there. One of them tugged on the wire experimentally. It didn't give. Another shook his head and said something sharp. Probably about how ridiculous this all was. How unnecessary. How they shouldn't have to deal with this. Then someone cut the fence. Bolt cutters again. This time the wire snapped back hard. Recoiling like it wanted to hurt someone. They flinched, swore. One of them nearly dropped the cutters. That should have been enough. It wasn't. They widened the gap, bent the wire back. One man stepped through first, boot catching on the bottom strand. He cursed again and yanked it free. Trespass, property damage, again. They crossed like the fence was an inconvenience, not a warning, like they were entitled to decide which boundaries mattered. I watched the footage once. Then I turned the phone off and went to bed, because the trap had closed. The next morning, I didn't call Karen. I called the county. I didn't say HOA. I didn't say dispute. I said, I need to report repeated criminal trespass and property damage. I have video. Those words matter. A deputy came out that afternoon. Older guy, calm, the kind of man who's seen enough nonsense to know when something doesn't add up. I walked him down the path, showed him the fence, the cut wire, the bent sections. Then I showed him the footage. He watched without interrupting. No comments, no reaction. When it ended, he handed the phone back to me. That's trespass, he said, and vandalism. He paused. You want me to go talk to them? I shook my head. Not yet. That caught his attention. If you talk to them now, I said, they'll claim it's a civil dispute, boundary confusion, HOA business. They'll muddy the water. He studied me for a moment. So, what do you want? He asked. I want a case number, I said. I want an official incident report filed today. Trespass, vandalism, documented. He went still. Most people want a warning, a conversation, something that feels like action but leaves no paper trail. This wasn't that. The deputy nodded slowly. I can do that. He wrote carefully. Asked for dates, times, confirmed property description, cross-checked mob stamps, took his own photos of the cut wire and the bent fence. When he finished, he tore off a card and handed it to me. A string of digits. To anyone else, just a number. To me, the first nail. This'll be on record, he said. If it happens again, it escalates. That's all I needed, I said. He hesitated, then glanced back toward the trees. They looked pretty comfortable doing this. I didn't answer. Comfort like that doesn't come from confusion. It comes from believing no one will ever make you pay. After he left, I slid the card into my folder, the one labeled HOA. By the end of the week, Karen's tone changed. Her emails got longer, more careful, less commanding. She stopped CCing the full board, started using phrases like seeking clarification and temporary measures. That's what fear looks like when it tries to sound professional, but she still didn't stop. Instead, she went around me. I found out when a neighbor, one who had lived here longer than Karen, leaned on my fence and spoke quietly. She's telling people you blocked an emergency access route, he said. Says you're putting folks at risk. That was mistake number 3, because now she wasn't just trespassing, she was lying to justify it. I thanked him, watched him walk away. Then I opened my notebook and wrote one line at the top of a fresh page, pattern established. That's when I knew the next phase wasn't about fences anymore. It was about intent. And Karen was making that easier every day. I didn't write the letter angry. That's important. Anger shows up in punctuation, in extra words, in threats that feel good in the moment and look bad later. I waited until the house was quiet, until the adrenaline had burned off, and the facts were all that remained. Then I sat down at the table with a yellow legal pad and wrote the outline by hand. Dates, times, actions, evidence. Only after that did I open the laptop. The letter wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Long letters invite arguments. Short ones invite compliance or mistakes. I addressed it to the HOA board, every member by name. No to whom it may concern. No wiggle room. I stated ownership first. Parcel number, recorded deed, survey reference, county file numbers. The kind of details that don't impress anyone but lawyers and judges. And those are the only people who matter at this stage. Then I documented the incidents, the initial notice, the sign, the cut wire, the bent post, the fence, the second intrusion. I referenced the case number from the sheriff's department, included still frames from the footage, timestamps, GPS overlays. I didn't editorialize, I didn't accuse, I didn't speculate. I recorded. Then I got to the point. The letter gave the HOA 30 calendar days to remove all unauthorized structures, materials, and improvements from my property. That included the cabin, any foundations, any utilities, any personal property left behind. After 30 days, anything remaining would be considered abandoned property under state law and handled accordingly, removed, disposed of, or salvaged at the HOA's expense. I didn't threaten to sue. I didn't threaten to demolish anything. I simply stated what would happen. That distinction matters. I had the letter notarized the same afternoon. Then I sent it 3 ways. Certified mail with signature required, email to the board's official address with red receipts, and a physical copy delivered to the HOA's registered office. Redundancy isn't aggression, it's insurance. Karen replied within 24 hours. This time she copied an attorney. The tone changed again, softer, more formal. Words like requesting clarification and seeking temporary relief appeared. She claimed the HOA believed the cabin fell under a long-standing use agreement. She suggested mediation. She asked that I refrain from unilateral action while discussions continued. She didn't mention the fence. She didn't mention the case number. She didn't mention the video. That omission was loud. I responded once, 1 paragraph. I acknowledged receipt of her email, confirmed the deadline, reiterated that any further entry onto my land without permission would be documented and added to the existing incident report. Nothing else. Then I waited, not idly. During those 30 days, I prepared. I pulled aerial imagery going back a decade. There was no cabin, no clearing, no path. I saved copies from different sources: county GIS, satellite archives, historical imagery, so no one could claim manipulation. I reviewed easement law, prescriptive use, adverse possession, the arguments HOAs like to make when they've overreached and need a story that sounds old enough to be true. None of it applied. There had been no continuous use, no permission, no notice, no taxes paid, no maintenance records, nothing but recent construction and a lot of confidence. I documented the cabin itself: measurements, materials, condition. I photographed everything, inside and out. Not because I cared about its value, but because someone else would claim it later. I also lined up a licensed demolition crew, not to schedule work, just to confirm availability. I explained the situation. Private land, unauthorized structure, pending removal under abandoned property statutes. The guy on the phone didn't laugh. He didn't question it. He asked for the address and the timeline. "Call me when the clock runs out," he said. Karen tried one more angle. A letter from the HOA's attorney arrived during the third week. Longer this time, full of language about irreparable harm and community interest. A warning that removal would be considered destructive interference. I forwarded it to my attorney. She read it, smiled once, and handed it back. "They're posturing," she said. "They know the clock is against them." That was the tell. If they believed their own story, they would have gone to court, asked for an injunction, sought an emergency order. They didn't. They sent letters. The deadline came and went quietly. No crews, no removal, no court filing, just silence. On the morning of day 31, I walked down to the fence and looked at the cabin one last time. It sat there exactly as it had from the start, confident, unmoved, like it assumed time itself would take its side. I checked my watch. The clock had expired, and from that moment on, nothing on that patch of land belonged to the HOA anymore. It was abandoned, which meant the next step wouldn't be a warning, it would be cleanup. People like to say, "Just let the courts handle it." That sounds responsible, civilized. It sounds like patience. Most of the time, it's just fear wearing a suit. I didn't avoid court because I was reckless. I avoided it because I understood what waiting actually does in situations like this. Waiting creates momentum, just not for the person who's right. Every day that cabin stayed standing, it gained weight. Not physical weight, perception. It started to feel permanent, familiar, like it belonged. People drove past it, took photos near it, talked about it like it had always been there. That's how encroachment works when it wins, not with a deed, with time. I'd seen it before, on docks, on disputed access roads, on shoreline easements where someone builds just far enough, just quietly enough, and then dares you to be the bad guy who tears it down. The law calls it acquiescence. Common sense calls it surrender. I had already done the polite version. I had given notice, I had given time, I had documented everything, and still, they stayed. So I asked myself a simple question: what changes if I wait? The answer was, nothing good. Karen would file motions, ask for continuances, claim hardship, spin it as a community issue, drag it into mediation, slow it down until exhaustion did her work for her. Meanwhile, the cabin would keep sitting there, aging into legitimacy, turning from an illegal structure into a disputed one. That's how you lose ground without ever stepping back. There's another thing people don't like to talk about. Courts don't like ambiguity, but they hate urgency even more. If you wait until the situation is rotten enough to stink, the judge's first instinct is to freeze everything. Status quo. No action, no removal, no resolution, just time. Time favors the person who's already wrong and comfortable. I wasn't interested in comfort. I was interested in precedent. The law doesn't just care who owns the land. It cares how you protect it. You post signs, you enforce boundaries, you document violations, you give notice. And when the deadline passes, you act. Not emotionally, procedurally. That's the difference between demolition and vandalism. One is chaos, the other is cleanup. I reviewed the statutes again. Abandoned property, unauthorized improvements, remedies available to a landowner when notice is ignored. It was all there, black and white. No requirement to wait for permission from the very people who'd already proven they didn't respect it. My attorney confirmed it. "You've done everything correctly," she said. "If you wait longer, it actually weakens your position." That was all I needed, but I still didn't rush. I gave it 2 more days, not because they deserved it, but because timing matters. I wanted the gap between the deadline and the action to be clean, deliberate, undeniable. On the second night, I walked down to the fence again. The cabin lights were off. The place looked smaller now, less confident, like something that knew it had overstayed its welcome but didn't know how to leave. I stood there for a long moment and thought about my father. He'd built this place with his own hands, not to make a statement, not to prove anything, just to have ground that answered to him and no one else. He used to say something that stuck with me. If you don't deal with problems while they're small, they don't stay problems. They become neighbors. That cabin wasn't a problem anymore. It was an occupation. I turned back toward the house and made the call. The demolition crew answered on the second ring. "The clock ran out," I said. There was a pause, then a calm reply. "We'll be there Monday morning." I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was anxious, because there's a particular kind of quiet that settles in right before something irreversible, the kind you feel more than hear. I knew what was coming next would change the tone of everything. For Karen, for the HOA, for anyone watching from the sidelines, waiting to see who blinked first. I wasn't waiting anymore. I had given them time. Now I was going to give them an example. The first engine started at 7:02 a.m., diesel. Low, steady. By the time the second truck rolled in, the fog was still hanging in the trees like it didn't know what it was about to watch. I didn't give a speech. I didn't explain anything. I handed the crew lead a copy of the notice, the survey, and the case number. He glanced at it once, nodded, and said, "We'll keep it clean." That's all I wanted. The skid steer went first, tracks biting into dirt that had never asked for concrete blocks or pressure-treated lumber. The bucket lifted, paused, then pressed into the cabin's side like it was testing a door that had already lost its lock. Wood cracked, not violently, decisively. The first wall folded inward, new lumber snapping like it had never been meant to last, clean angles collapsing into raw geometry, nails screaming as they tore free. This wasn't destruction, it was reversal. The drone went up immediately. Straight vertical climb, wide frame, no edits, no music, just documentation. Every movement captured, every angle accounted for. By 7:14, the roof came off. By 7:26, the walls followed. No one cheered, no one rushed. They worked like men who knew exactly what they were allowed to do, and exactly what they weren't. The foundation blocks were lifted and stacked, the lumber sorted, the metal separated. Nothing smashed unless it had to be. Cleanup, not chaos. At 7:41, Karen arrived. She didn't park. She stopped in the middle of the access road like she was blocking a parade. White SUV. Driver's door flew open before the engine even shut off. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Her voice cut through the machinery like glass breaking in a factory. I didn't answer. I didn't look at her right away. I waited until the operator killed the engine and the clearing went quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every word permanent. Then I turned. "You were notified," I said. She marched toward me, phone already up, recording. Hair perfect, sunglasses on. The confidence was still there, but it was cracking at the edges. "You can't do this," she snapped. "This is HOA property. This is criminal. This is—" "Stop," I said. One word. Flat. She did. That surprised her more than the demolition. I handed her the folder, not angrily, not forcefully, like a receipt. 30-day notice, I said. Genau. I said. Expired yesterday. Case number is inside. Everything remaining on my land was abandoned. She flipped through the pages too fast. Her hands weren't steady anymore. "This is theft," she said. "This is vandalism." I shook my head. "This is cleanup." Behind her, the crew kept working, lumber being stacked neatly, metal clinking into a separate pile, the old blocks loaded onto the flatbed with care that felt almost insulting. That's when she saw it. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond the fence line on HOA land, the crew had placed the materials they had already removed, sorted, strapped, tidy, and taped to the top of the stack, flapping lightly in the morning breeze, was a white envelope. The invoice. Demolition services, labor, equipment, cleanup, due upon receipt. Her face changed. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to disbelief. "You expect us to pay for this?" she asked. "No," I said. "I expect you to read it." She laughed then, a sharp, brittle sound. "You're finished," she said. "I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling the police. You're finished." I nodded. "They already have the footage." That landed. Her phone lowered slightly. "What footage?" "The fence," I said. "The wire, the second entry, all documented, all attached to the same case number." She stared at me. I could see the math starting to fail behind her eyes. Then she exploded. She turned on the crew, screaming about lawsuits, about six-figure damages, about community rights and history and tradition. She demanded names, demanded machines be shut down, demanded control. No one moved. That's when she turned back to me, close enough now that I could smell her perfume, something expensive and wasted. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You think a judge is going to side with you after this?" I leaned in just enough for her camera to catch it. "I don't need to win," I said. "I just need the record to be accurate." She froze. Because for the first time, she understood what this had never been about. By 9:10 a.m., the cabin was gone. Not a pile, not rubble. Gone. The ground where it had stood was scraped clean, raked smooth, no foundation, no footprint, just disturbed earth and tire tracks already fading. The crew loaded the last of the material onto the flatbed and drove it across the fence line. They set it down exactly where I told them to. Then they taped the invoice more securely to the top. The crew lead walked over. "Anything else?" I shook my head. "That'll do it." Karen stood there long after the engines left, still recording, still talking, still arguing with no one. When she finally stopped, the silence swallowed her whole. "You haven't heard the last of this," she said weakly. I didn't answer. Because she was right, but not in the way she thought. I walked back to the fence and looked at the empty space where the cabin had been. The absence was louder than the machine noise ever was. The lawsuit arrived the next morning. Courier, manila envelope, red stamp that said urgent like urgency could change facts. Karen didn't waste time. She never did when she thought speed could replace accuracy. The complaint was thick, dramatic, expensive looking, full of phrases meant to scare people who hadn't read past the first page. Destruction of HOA property, intentional infliction of emotional distress, interference with community access, loss of use, 6 figures in damages. They attach photos of the cabin from before demolition, wide shots, smiling faces, folding chairs, seasonal decorations, no dates, no coordinates, just vibes. They also attached a map. I laughed out loud when I saw it. It was a color printout, shaded green over the creek area, labeled Community Recreation Zone. No county seal, no parcel numbers, no bearings, no surveyor's stamp. It looked like something assembled the night before with a free PDF editor and confidence. I didn't respond directly. I forwarded everything to my attorney. She called me 20 minutes later. "This is bad," she said. Then she paused. "For them." Karen didn't stop there. By noon, the HOA Facebook group lit up. Posts accusing me of destroying a beloved gathering space, claims that seniors had been displaced, comments about safety, tradition, and outsiders who didn't respect the community. Karen posted once herself, a photo of the empty clearing. Caption, "A community landmark destroyed by an individual who believes rules don't apply to him. Legal action pending." She tagged the local paper. That was mistake number 4. Because public statements turn private disputes into records. By mid-afternoon, a reporter called. Local station, calm voice, neutral tone, asked if I wanted to comment on the lawsuit. "Yes," I said, "but only on camera." We met the next morning at the edge of the clearing. I wore a clean flannel, no logos, no slogans. I brought a folding table and laid everything out neatly. Survey, deed, aerial imagery, timeline, still frames from the fence footage. When the camera rolled, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I explained. "This land has been in my family for decades," I said. "The structure that was removed was built without permission. I gave notice. I waited. I documented. Then I removed abandoned property. The reporter asked about the HOA's claim that the land was communal. I handed her the map Karen had posted. Ask them where this came from, I said, and why it doesn't match any official record. The piece aired that night. Karen didn't watch it quietly. She showed up at the station during the live segment, stormed into frame while the reporter was mid-sentence. "This man is lying," she shouted. "That land has been used by our community for 20 years. The cameraman didn't cut away. I let her talk. When she ran out of breath, I stepped forward and held up my deed. Laminated, clean, boring. The reporter took it from my hand and looked down at the county seal. Karen stared at it like she'd just been shown a mirror she didn't recognize. The clip went viral locally, not because of me, because of her. The next day, the HOA sent out a newsletter accusing me of spying on neighbors with surveillance equipment and staging footage. They implied I was building unpermitted structures of my own. My attorney sent a cease and desist before lunch. Defamation, false statements, demand for retraction. Karen replied with another email, longer, angrier, sloppier. She doubled down on the community map. She claimed it had been compiled over years. That was mistake number 5, because she put authorship in play. That evening, an email came through my website, anonymous. Short subject line, "This isn't right." The message was cautious, measured. Not everyone agrees with what she's doing. She didn't get a vote. She pushed this through herself. If this goes to court, there are things you should see. No attachments. Not yet. I forwarded it to my attorney and didn't respond. The next morning, I requested HOA meeting minutes. 6 months worth. All votes, all approvals related to land use, construction, or legal action. They were legally required to provide them. They didn't. So, my attorney filed a discovery request. That's when the cracks started to show. Karen's public posts got quieter, comments got locked. The HOA Facebook group went private. People started deleting replies they had written the day before. I didn't respond to the anonymous email right away. That wasn't hesitation. That was calibration. Anonymous messages aren't lifelines. They're pressure leaks. You don't grab them. You trace where the stress is coming from. The attachments were enough to start. Internal HOA emails, draft layouts. A file labeled retreat layout, do not share. My land outlined in red, clean lines, precise placement, and one note in the margin, typed casually like a grocery reminder. Build fast before he notices. That sentence did more damage than any confession, because it established intent. I met with my attorney that afternoon. We spread everything out across the table. Emails, drafts, timestamps, the incident report, the demolition notice, the footage logs. She tapped the file once. "You don't need more evidence," she said. "You need one human being who won't lie." I nodded. I already know who. He was the quiet one, the man who stood behind Karen during the first confrontation. Didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't look comfortable. The kind of man who knew exactly what was happening and hated every second of it. I found his name in the HOA filings, then his address. I went alone, no lawyer, no recorder, no threats. He opened the door and didn't pretend to be surprised. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm here to ask you something simple." He stepped aside. We sat at his kitchen table, coffee gone cold between us. "I'm not asking you to take my side," I said. "I'm asking whether you plan to go down with her." I slid the do not share plan across the table. "You knew that wasn't HOA land," I said. "You knew before the first board went up." He stared at the paper. "She said it would be handled," he muttered. "That it always is." "Handled how?" I asked. He exhaled. "Delay, noise, make people tired." I nodded. "That works on most people." Silence. "She never put it to a vote," he said finally. "She told us not to worry. Said nobody ever checks the ridge." That was the crack. "Court's in 2 weeks," I said. "They're going to ask who approved the build, who made the map, and who ordered the fence removed." I slid one more still frame toward him. Karen, pointing at the sign, her arm stiff with authority. Behind her, one of the men held bolt cutters. Her mouth was open mid-sentence. The timestamp was clear. He swallowed. "If I tell the truth," he said, "I'm done with the HOA." "If you don't," I replied, "you're done with the law." That was enough. Karen testified first. Red blazer, chin lifted, voice smooth, confident in the way only people who've never been contradicted publicly can be. She talked about tradition, community use, misunderstandings, claimed she'd been shocked to see the cabin destroyed without warning. Then the judge asked the question. "Ms. Westbrook," he said, "were there any signs or physical barriers indicating private property prior to the demolition?" Karen didn't hesitate. "No, Your Honor," she said. "The land was open. There were no signs, no fencing. I didn't move. I didn't react. I waited." My attorney stood. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "we'd like to enter Exhibit 12. The screen came alive. Video footage, night vision. Karen stood just inside the tree line, perfectly visible. She didn't touch the fence, she didn't dirty her hands, she didn't have to. She pointed at the sign and said, clear as day, "Cut it down, now." The man with the bolt cutters hesitated. Karen turned on him. "I said now." The wire snapped. The courtroom went still. The video played again, slower. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Westbrook," he said quietly, "you were under oath when you testified moments ago." Karen's lawyer shifted. "Counsel," the judge continued, "would you like to amend your client's testimony?" Karen opened her mouth, closed it. That's when my attorney stood again. "Your Honor," she said, "we'd like to call our next witness." The quiet man walked to the stand. He didn't look at Karen. He looked at the judge. He testified to everything. No vote, no permission, no confusion. He confirmed Karen ordered the build, ordered the removal of the sign, ordered the fence breached. When he finished, the courtroom felt smaller. The judge removed his glasses. "This court does not look kindly on false testimony," he said, "nor on attempts to manufacture jurisdiction." He looked directly at Karen. "And it has very little patience for arrogance masquerading as authority." Karen didn't melt down. She didn't scream. She just deflated. Because for the first time, the record wasn't something she could manage. It was something she was trapped inside. The courtroom didn't feel dramatic. That's what surprised people. No shouting, no gasps, no banging gavel theatrics. Just fluorescent lights, old carpet, and the quiet sound of papers being stacked in the order they'd be remembered forever. The judge sat back in his chair and removed his glasses. That's usually how it starts when patience runs out. "I've reviewed the filings," he said. "I've reviewed the exhibits. And I've reviewed the testimony." He looked down at the bench for a moment, then back up. This was not a misunderstanding. Karen shifted in her seat. "This was not a boundary dispute," the judge continued. "And it was certainly not a community tradition issue." He turned a page. "This was a deliberate act. An unauthorized construction on private land, followed by attempts to fabricate jurisdiction, obstruct removal, and misrepresent facts, both publicly and under oath." Karen's attorney opened his mouth. The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, counsel." The room went still. "Ms. Westbrook," the judge said, "you were given notice. You ignored it. You were recorded ordering the removal of posted warnings. You then testified, under oath, that no such warnings existed." He paused. "That is not advocacy. That is perjury." Karen's face didn't collapse. It hardened. That was the last defense she had. The judge continued. "This court finds that the structure known as the retreat cabin was built entirely on private land without permission. The plaintiff," he nodded toward Karen, "had no legal claim to occupy, alter, or defend that land." He turned toward me. "Mr. Bull, your actions in removing the structure were lawful. You followed proper notice procedures. You documented violations. You acted within your rights." A line I hadn't realized I was holding inside my chest finally loosened. "The countersuit is granted in full." Karen inhaled sharply. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he said, "the court finds sufficient cause to refer this matter to the district attorney's office for review." Karen's attorney looked down. "Potential charges include falsification of documents, criminal trespass, and perjury." That word landed heavier than any verdict. Perjury. The judge folded his hands. "This court does not exist to rubber stamp entitlement. It exists to enforce boundaries." He looked directly at Karen. "And boundaries matter." Silence. Then the gavel came down. Once, not loud, final. Karen didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't even look at me. She gathered her papers slowly, like they still meant something, and stood on legs that no longer carried authority, just weight. Her attorney leaned in and whispered about appeals. The judge didn't look back. Outside, the reporters were already waiting. Cameras, microphones, questions fired like reflexes. "Mr. Are you satisfied with the outcome?" I thought about it. Satisfied wasn't the word. "I'm relieved," I said, "because the record is now accurate. That was all." Karen pushed past the cameras without a word. Her red blazer didn't look powerful anymore, just loud. By that afternoon, her name disappeared from the HOA website. By the end of the week, her resignation letter circulated quietly through the neighborhood. Personal reasons, it said. The HOA entered an audit. 2 board members stepped down. The lawsuit vanished from the docket like it had never belonged there. A week later, the land was quiet again. No trucks, no signs, no voices pretending they belonged there. I went back down to the clearing early one morning, with a mug of coffee and the dogs at my heels. The ground where the cabin had stood was flat now, clean, just earth, leaves, and the sound of water moving the way it always had. Nothing felt missing. That surprised me. People think victory feels loud, like fireworks or shouting. It doesn't. Real victory feels like silence returning to a place that was never meant to be crowded. I sat on a fallen log and watched the creek for a while, thought about my father, about how land doesn't need defending every day, only when someone decides rules don't apply to them. Before I left, I set one small wooden sign near the trail. Not dramatic, not threatening, just the truth, carved clean and straight. Private land. No HOA authority. Then I walked home, because peace doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from holding boundaries and knowing when to enforce them.